What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Kelsey's Constrictors. Today's video is going to be the second part of my ball python genes mini-series, which I started last week. Today we're going to be focusing on recessive genes, which I'm very excited about because I love recessive genes, and all three of the genes that I am planning on focusing on for my breeding projects are recessive genes, so they hold a special place in my heart. As I touched on in my last video, there are hundreds and hundreds of ball python genes, so I can't go over every single one because this video would be an hour long. But I do want to touch on some of the main ones, especially the ones that I'm planning on working with, and some of the other really popular ones so that you can get an idea of how recessive genes work. I'm also going to walk you through how to start a recessive breeding project if you plan on starting that for yourself. It is a little bit different when you're working on recessive genes with ball pythons breeding versus the dominant or the co-dominant because it takes a little bit more planning to get your desired results. So I did touch on this a little bit in the last video, but ball python genetics are pretty similar to humans. So if you have two brown-eyed people and they have a baby, then the chance of them having brown eyes is extremely high, but it depends on how many copies of the gene you have. So if each parent has 2 copies of the brown eye gene, every single child they have is going to have brown eyes. Now if one parent has a brown eye gene, which is dominant, which is why they would have brown eyes, and then their secondary gene is blue eyes, and then the other parent also carries a second gene for blue eyes, then the child has a chance of having blue eyes. Ball python genes work very similar. So since I have her out, I'll use Pied as an example. Obviously she is too small to breed, but let's say she was big enough and I was planning on pairing her this year. If I breed her to any of my other snakes that don't have a Pied gene, either visual or recessive, every single baby is going to be 100% heterozygous for Pied. That means every baby will be carrying a copy of the Pied gene. Then if I took one of those babies and bred them back to her, then I would have a chance of getting some visual snakes because she is visual. Unfortunately, this is the only Pied snake that I have. I do have another snake, Monty. He's my original ball python that I suspect may be het for Pied. So he possibly could be carrying the recessive gene, but I won't know until I try to prove him out. So if I paired him with her and they had some Pied babies, then I would know that he is 100% heterozygous for Pied. Now if you breed 2 visual recessive snakes together, then 100% of the babies will be carrying that gene as a visual expression. Now this is where recessive genes get really complicated when you're trying to stack them together. My end goal snake is to have an axanthic, clown, Pied, ball python. That's 3 recessive genes. Recessive gene snakes typically go for a little bit more money than dominant or co-dominant. Even if they are just heterozygous, they usually go for a little bit more money depending on the gene. Desert Ghost is a really popular recessive gene right now, as is Piebald, which has been popular for a very long time. Axanthic is another popular recessive gene. So when you start trying to stack recessive genes together, it ends up becoming a very long-term project. So for my example, Axanthic Clown Pied, I have to find snakes that either have the heterozygous copies of the gene that are not visual, or I have to find visual snakes and then pair them together so that I have multiple snakes carrying the gene, and then pair them to other snakes that have the recessive gene, and then pair them to other snakes that has a recessive gene. So obviously the shortcut to that would be buying a snake that already is visual or is carrying multiple copies of the recessive genes you want to work with, but sometimes that can get pretty pricey. So for example, if I wanted to jumpstart my Axanthic Clown Pied project, I could try to find an Axanthic Clown, which I have found on Morph Market. Guess how much they cost? I'm not really willing to pay $6,000 for a snake at this point in time because I'm just getting started. So obviously if you have the money laying around and you want to really put a good investment into your breeding project, you can go ahead and get a multiple stack recessive gene snake to help you kickstart it and go a little bit faster. I just don't have the funds for that right now, so I'm starting kind of the traditional way, which is how everyone started at some point. You cannot have a multiple recessive gene snake without spending the time to really dive in and put those genes together over time. So this is a multiple year project that we're talking about. So let's just say I want to just stick with Axanthic Clown for the simplicity of this argument, so it doesn't take a bunch of time. I just want to give you an example. So Axanthic Clown, I would have to breed a clown to an Axanthic visual. Then all of the babies will be 100% heterozygous for clown and axanthic. Then I will have to breed one of those babies back to one of the parents. So ideally I would have 2 babies, a male and a female, that would both be 100% het for the axanthic and the clown. Then I would breed both of those back to both of their parents. So then I would have a chance of getting the visual of the clown and the axanthic on both sides. And then each of those babies will be 50% het for whatever the gene was that wasn't visual visual to begin with. So ideally, the third generation would be a visual xanthic and a visual clown, and then they would both be 50% het for the opposite gene. So then you would breed those babies back a generation or two to try and get the double recessive version of that snake. So like I said, this is a 3 to 5 year project just to get the double visual recessive that you're looking for. This is why if you're working with recessive genes, it's really nice if you have the money to go ahead and invest in a double or triple recessive, whether it's visual or not. It's really good to invest the money in that because it's really going to help you speed it up. Because the way these snakes were created, that's exactly how they started. Something that's really popular right now is putting pied in with other recessive genes. A really popular snake right now is called a dreamsicle, and it is a lavender albino pied ball python. I personally am not a huge fan of albino. I really like dark morphs. I like working with dark colors and stuff like that. So the albino isn't really my favorite, but they do look really cool with the white patches and the orange. Another recessive gene that people like to work with is called Hypo, which is also called ghost. So Hypo comes from hypomelanistic, which is a lack of melanin in their scales, in their skin, the coloring. So that's just a nickname for the gene is Hypo, but it means hypomelanistic. To me, the Hypo gene kind of makes it look like the snake is in shed all the time. So it's kind of like a lightning, almost like a gray type wash over the snake. It's actually pretty cool looking, especially when you pair it with some different genes. It can end up looking really, really awesome. This is Phoebe. She is a pastel clown, and she is going to be a key part of my future projects working with the clown, xanthic, and pied. If I breed her to any of my other snakes that don't have the heterozygous or visual gene, then all of the babies will be 100% heterozygous for clown. Now, I do have 2 snakes that are het for clown. One's a boy and one's a girl. So if I breed her to a snake that has a heterozygous clown gene, then I have a chance of having some visual babies. Any snakes that don't come out of that pairing with the clown gene visually will be 100% heterozygous for clown because she is visual. So now here's another little complicated part of breeding recessive genes. So if I have 2 snakes that are both heterozygous for any given gene, if I breed those 2 snakes together, then I do have a chance of getting some visual snakes. However, any of them that don't show up with it, because neither of the parents were visual, will only be 66% chance to have that gene. So if I was to breed any 2 snakes that both carry the gene but aren't visual, if I was to sell them, I can only market them as 66% heterozygous for that gene. Now, with some of these recessive genes, sometimes there are markers that can help you identify whether or not the snake has the gene, but they are not a guarantee, and you cannot put 100% het even if they have markers. Pied is a great example of that. Monty, I want to try to prove him out het for pied, but I have no way of knowing unless he produces pied babies. Now, if you have a snake that has a recessive gene that's not visual, but they're 100% heterozygous for that gene and you know it, and you breed them to any snake that doesn't carry the gene at all of the babies will only be 50% het for that gene. Now, the reason knowing this stuff is important is if you're getting into breeding and you're looking to sell snakes, you don't want to be misadvertising your snakes. You don't want to be selling a snake that is 100% het for something. In reality, it's only 50 or 66%. That's going to piss a lot of people off, and you're going to ruin your reputation selling snakes. Now, keeping that in mind, when you're shopping for snakes, make sure you're very careful buying hets. Unless the snake is visual, I would try to stay with big name breeders or people who have a really good reputation when you're buying into recessive genes that aren't visual. Because here's a really easy way to scam people. You get on there, you advertise a snake as 100% het, say Desert Ghost, when in reality it's only 50%. Well, because 100% het means it is guaranteed to carry that gene, they can jack the price up by hundreds, maybe even thousands of dollars, depending on what the gene is. So be very careful if you're buying recessive genes that aren't visual from people that you don't know or don't have a good reputation. If you haven't seen my other video where I talk about choosing a breeder and choosing a healthy snake, I'll link it up here because I talk a lot more about different kind of scams that can go along with that. So now let's get into how to start a recessive breeding project. So if your goal is to have a single visual recessive gene snake, that's pretty easy. All you have to do is buy a visual or heterozygous pair of that gene, and then you can breed them together and potentially get what you're looking for. The easiest way to get a visually recessive snake is to breed 2 visual recessive snakes. Not everyone has enough money laying around to buy 2 visually recessive snakes. So if you're looking for a more cost-effective way to get into a recessive breeding project, then I will tell you how to do that now. In my opinion, the best way to start a recessive breeding project is to have a few females that are heterozygous for the gene you're looking for, and then having a visual visual male. Because a male can be paired to multiple females, this heightens your chances of getting some visual snakes. Another upside to doing it this way is any snakes that don't come out as visual, like I said earlier, will be 100% heterozygous for that gene. So this is going to up your prices when you're trying to sell your snakes because you know that all the babies are 100% het for that gene. Now, if you're looking into doing a multiple gene recessive project, the same thing kind of applies. I would get a couple of females that are heterozygous for those two genes, and then I would have a male that is either visual for both or visual for one and het for the other. Now, when you're going to buy these snakes, a lot of people will sell their hets as pairs. This is a really good way to save some money as well because a lot of times people will discount if you buy more than one snake from them. Now, if you plan on doing this, just get some information on the snakes and see if they're from the same clutch or if they are mom and son or something like that. If they're from the same kind of line of snakes, from the same family, just be careful doing that because doing too much inbreeding, obviously you can do it for a generation or two, but if you inbreed your snakes too much, you are going to start creating some genetic problems with them. So make sure if you do get a pair, it's okay to pair them for 1 or 2 generations within the same family, but I would make sure that you start the next year or the year after that. I would buy a snake that is completely unrelated to continue your project because you don't want to compromise the genetic quality of your snakes. Also keep in mind when you're starting a recessive breeding project, it takes 3 years for females to be ready. So don't waste your money on buying a male and a female both as babies because your male is going to be ready within a year, year and a half, but your females aren't going to be ready for 3 years. So if you're trying to go the financially savvy route, just buy some heterozygous females, let them grow up for 2 years, and then go and buy your male. That way you have some time to save up some money and get something that's like really good because again, your best chance of having a good quality snake that you can sell for the most amount of money for what it is to have a visual snake as the parent because then you know that any babies that aren't visual are 100% heterozygous. And that is all I have for today's video. I hope y'all enjoyed that. If you have any questions or anything I missed, leave it in the comments below. If you love snakes, hit that subscribe button. I'm taking y'all through my journey of breeding ball pythons. This is going to be my first year, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss any videos that I upload. Make sure you follow us on Instagram. It's Kelsey's Constrictors, and I'll see y'all next time.